Shiana Jones had learned to wear humility like an evening gown, beautiful, expensive and suffocating. The diamond necklace felt heavy in her hands, cold against her palms, despite the warmth radiating from the apartment heater. Shiana stood before the full-length mirror in the bedroom, studying the woman reflected back at her. She looked like someone who belonged at elegant events, someone who had everything figured out. The red dress hugged her curves perfectly, the fabric whispering wealth with every movement. Her hair was styled in soft waves that had taken an hour to achieve, each section carefully curled and pinned before being released to fall just so. Her makeup was flawless, applied with the precision of someone who'd learned from professionals, but rarely had reason to use those skills anymore. She looked like a woman ready to conquer the world. Inside, her stomach twisted with anticipation that felt more like dread with each passing moment. A feeling she couldn't name, couldn't shake, that whispered warnings she didn't want to hear. Tonight was supposed to change everything. Tonight, at Joey Godfrey's launch event, she would finally step out of the shadows she'd been hiding in for 3 years. She would reveal who she really was, what she really came from, and watch as the truth transformed their relationship into something public and real. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. No more secret marriage that made her feel like a dirty secret instead of a cherished wife. The necklace in her hands had belonged to her grandmother, diamonds and platinum, designed by a jeweler whose name most people only read about in history books. Her grandmother had worn it on her wedding day, standing beside the man who'd helped her build an empire that lasted generations. Her great-grandmother before that. It was worth more than most people earned in their entire lives, and Shiana was about to wear it to a party in a rented venue where Joey would unveil his little startup to investors who had no idea they were standing in the presence of real wealth. She fastened the necklace around her throat. It settled into place like it had been waiting for her, heavy with history and expectation. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Words spoken on her deathbed while Shiana held her hand and tried not to cry, tried to be strong enough to hear the wisdom being passed down. Baby girl, some men will love what you can give them, not who you are. Make sure he knows the difference. At the time, Shiana had nodded and promised she understood. She'd been so certain Joey was different, so convinced that by hiding her wealth, she'd found someone who loved her for herself. Now, 3 years into a marriage she'd kept secret from everyone who mattered. She wondered if she'd ever understood anything at all. The doubt crept in during quiet moments like these, but she pushed it away. Tonight would prove her grandmother wrong. Tonight would show that Joey had chosen her, the real her, before knowing about the money. Joey didn't know about the necklace, didn't know about the estate where she'd grown up. The one with gates that opened automatically, and grounds so vast you could walk for an hour without seeing the same tree twice. Didn't know about the staff who'd practically raised her, the private tutors who'd educated her, the society events her mother had dragged her to throughout her childhood. He didn't know about the trust fund that could buy his entire company without making a dent in her accounts. He didn't know her family's name meant something in rooms he'd never been invited into, that CEOs and senators and people who shaped policy knew exactly who the Jones family was. She'd hidden it all, intentionally, desperately, because she'd wanted to be loved for herself, not for her last name or the zeros in her bank accounts. She'd wanted to prove she could make it on her own, build a life without the weight of her family's legacy, crushing every choice she made. She'd wanted what her grandmother had warned her about, proof that someone could love Shiana the person, not Shiana the heiress. So she'd lied. Not about who she was exactly, but about what came with her. She'd told Joey her family had money but kept it vague. A comfortable inheritance, she'd said when he'd asked once early in their relationship. Nothing spectacular. Enough to be comfortable but not enough to change their lives. He'd accepted it without question. Too focused on his own dreams to dig deeper into hers. Too focused on himself to wonder why she never talked about her family, never invited him to meet them, never shared details about her childhood. And she'd given him everything. Her time, her energy, her identity. She'd quit graduate school when he said he needed her support more than she needed a degree. The professor who'd been supervising her thesis had called twice, confused about her sudden departure, and she'd made excuses rather than admit the truth. She'd moved across the country when he said his startup required a fresh environment, away from distractions, away from her family, her friends, everyone who'd known her before. She'd kept their marriage quiet when he explained that being seen as a young, available entrepreneur would help him secure funding from investors who preferred backing hungry, unattached visionaries. For 3 years, she'd made herself smaller and smaller, folding herself into whatever shape he needed, convincing herself that love meant sacrifice and partnership meant supporting his dreams, even when her own withered from neglect. She'd stopped painting, stopped reading the books she loved, stopped having opinions that differed from his. She'd become an echo of what he needed, rather than a voice of her own. Tonight that would end. Tonight she would stand beside him at his launch event and reveal the truth. She would tell the room that she was Shiana Jones, sole heir to the Jones Industrial Holdings empire, and that she'd chosen Joey before she'd chosen to share her wealth. She would show everyone that he hadn't needed to struggle alone. That support had been there all along, if he'd just bothered to see her as more than a convenient accessory to his ambitions. She imagined his face when he understood. The shock, the gratitude, the love that would finally be about her instead of what she could provide. She imagined him taking her hand in front of everyone and saying he was proud to call her his wife. She imagined everything changing. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. A text from Joey sent 20 minutes ago. At the venue. Too busy to wait. Just meet me there. No kiss emoji. No you'll look beautiful. No acknowledgement that tonight mattered to her too. Shana stared at the message, something cold settling in her chest. She shook it off. He was nervous, stressed, focused on making sure everything went perfectly. That was all. The car service arrived exactly on time. Shiana gathered her small clutch purse, checked her appearance one final time, and walked out of the apartment they'd shared for 2 years. The building was modest, the kind of place young couples rented when they were building towards something better. She'd paid the deposit and the first 6 months of rent from her trust fund, but Joey thought they split everything equally. Another small lie in a relationship built on careful omissions. The drive across the city felt both endless and far too short. Shiana watched buildings blur past, streetlights painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would position the revelation. She wanted it to feel like a gift, not an accusation, like she'd been saving this truth for the perfect moment. And that moment was now. The venue was in the heart of downtown. All glass and steel and modern lines that Joey had probably chosen because it looked important in photographs. Cars lined the circular drive, expensive models that suggested the guest list included people with money to invest. Good. They would understand what the Jones name meant. Shiana stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress and checking that the necklace sat properly. A few people near the entrance turned to look at her, and she saw the moment they registered the dress, the jewelry, the way she carried herself. She'd spent 3 years pretending to be ordinary. Tonight, she would stop pretending. Inside, the venue hummed with conversation and clinking glasses. Soft jazz played from speakers hidden somewhere in the high ceilings. Waiters circulated with champagne and appetizers. Everyone looked successful and important, the kind of crowd that Joey had been working so hard to impress. Shiana scanned the room for her husband, spotted him near the stage, talking animatedly with a group of men in suits. He looked good, confident, in his element. Pride swelled in her chest despite everything. He'd worked so hard for this moment. She was happy for him. She started to make her way through the crowd when she heard voices coming from down a hallway marked "Staff Only." One of those voices was Joey's. The other was female, light and flirtatious. Shiana changed direction. Maybe he was talking to one of the event coordinators about timing or logistics. She'd find him, Tell him she'd arrived? Maybe steal a moment alone before the presentations began. The hallway was quieter, away from the main party. She followed the sound of voices to a door that stood slightly ajar, soft light spilling through the gap. Joey's voice carried clearly. She's so naive. She has no idea what's really going on. Shana froze. A woman's laugh. Does she really think you're going to stay with her after tonight? God, it's almost too easy. She'd do anything I ask. More laughter. Intimate, knowing. The kind of laughter that spoke of shared secrets and bodies that knew each other. Zayana's hand moved to the door before her brain caught up with her body. She pushed it open slowly, silently. The office was small, clearly meant for event staff. A desk, a couch, a champagne bottle lying on its side, liquid soaking into the carpet. And there on that couch, Joey and a woman Shiana recognized as Larissa Finch, his assistant, were tangled together, his shirt unbuttoned, her dress hiked up, his hands in her hair, her lips on his neck. They didn't hear the door open, didn't notice her standing there frozen in the doorway, her entire world cracking apart like glass under pressure. Then Joey looked up. Their eyes met. For one perfect crystalline moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The universe held still, while Shana's heart shattered into pieces so small she'd never find them all. Joey's face went white, then red, then something worse than guilty, annoyed. He looked annoyed that she'd interrupted. "Shiana?" His voice was flat. "You're early." Not sorry. Not devastated. Not scrambling to explain. Just annoyed. Larissa sat up slowly, deliberately, adjusting her dress with movements designed to make sure Shiana saw everything. She smiled. Actually smiled. There was cruelty in it and triumph, and something else Shiana couldn't name because her brain was too busy trying to process what her eyes were showing her. "I should go," Shiana heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She stepped back into the hallway, closed the door, stood there for a moment, while her lungs remembered how to work and her heart remembered how to beat. Behind the door, she heard Joey curse. Heard movement. He'd be putting himself back together now, preparing whatever explanation he'd tried to sell her. But Shiana was already walking away, back down the hallway, back toward the sounds of the party and the people who had no idea that everything had just changed. She walked into the main room, found a waiter, took a glass of champagne, drank it in 3 swallows, took another. The necklace at her throat felt like a noose now, a reminder of all the things she'd almost revealed to a man who was currently in a back room with his mistress, laughing about how naive his wife was. Shiana looked around the room at all these successful, important people, looked at the stage where Joey would soon stand and talk about his vision and his dreams and his integrity, looked at her reflection in the glass walls and saw a fool wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars. She'd come here to reveal her truth. Instead, she'd discovered his, and everything had changed. She arrived at the launch in a blood-red dress, ready to crown him king, but queens don't share thrones with liars. Chapter 2. Shattered Glass. The conference room door was cracked open just enough for truth to slip through. Shana stood in the middle of the crowded venue, champagne glass in hand, and felt absolutely nothing. The numbness was a mercy. If she let herself feel what had just happened, if she allowed even a crack in the wall she'd built around her emotions, she would collapse right here among all these strangers in expensive suits. So she felt nothing instead. Nothing was safer. Nothing could be controlled. Around her, people laughed and networked and strategized. Someone asked her if she was enjoying the event, their smile wide and professional. She heard herself say yes, heard herself make small talk about the impressive turnout and the beautiful venue, heard herself sound perfectly normal while everything inside her screamed and raged and wanted to burn the building down around them. She watched the hallway, waited for Joey to emerge, wondered what his face would look like when he had to confront her after what she'd witnessed. Would he be sorry? Would he lie? Would he try to convince her she hadn't seen what she'd absolutely, certainly seen? Would he use that same charming voice he used with investors to try to charm his way out of destroying their marriage? He appeared 10 minutes later. His shirt was buttoned now, hair smoothed back into place, not a thread out of order. He scanned the room with the confidence of someone who believed he'd gotten away with something, found her, and their eyes met across the distance. She saw calculation in his gaze, saw him deciding on his approach, choosing which version of himself to present. The apologetic husband, the defensive man, the victim of circumstance? Then he smiled. Not sheepish or apologetic, just his regular smile. The one he used to charm investors and close deals. The one she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, thinking it was just for her. He was going to pretend it hadn't happened. Going to act like she hadn't just caught him tangled up with another woman in a room down the hall. Shana felt something crack in the numbness. Anger, maybe, or something colder. Something that felt like clarity wrapped in ice. Joey made his way through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and accept congratulations, taking his time getting to her. Playing the role of successful entrepreneur, soaking up the attention. When he finally arrived, he put his hand on the small of her back, like everything was normal. Like he had the right to touch her. Like her body belonged to him, simply because they'd signed papers, making it legal. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "But not here, after the presentation. Let's not make a scene. There's nothing to talk about. Don't be dramatic. What you saw, it's not what you think. I saw you on a couch with Larissa. Your shirt was off. Her dress was hiked up. Your hands were in her hair. What part am I misunderstanding?" His jaw tightened. People were starting to glance their way, sensing tension even if they couldn't hear the words. "Keep your voice down. This is important to me. Can you not make a scene on the most important night of my life?" And the words hit like a slap. The most important night of his life. Not theirs, his, because that's all any of this had ever been about. His dreams, his success, his moment. She'd been nothing but a supporting character in the story of Joey Godfrey's rise to greatness. "Don't worry," Shana said, her voice perfectly calm, each word enunciated with precision. "I won't make a scene." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you. I knew you'd understand. You always understand. We'll talk after, okay? I'll explain everything. It's not what it looked like." He kissed her cheek. She let him, her body frozen, her mind elsewhere. Then he walked away, moving toward the stage where the presentations would begin, where he would stand in front of all these people and talk about integrity and vision and building something that mattered. Shiana stood very still, feeling the weight of her grandmother's necklace pressing against her collarbones. She thought about what she'd planned for tonight. Standing beside Joey, revealing her identity, claiming her place in his world, showing everyone that she'd chosen him before revealing her wealth, that their love had been real before money complicated it. He didn't deserve any of it. More than that, she didn't want to give it to him. Didn't want him to know who she really was or what she really had. Because if he knew, he'd try to use it. Try to manipulate her into staying, into forgiving, into believing his lies, because suddenly she'd become valuable in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd find new ways to exploit her wealth, new schemes to separate her from her money. No, better to let him think she was exactly who he believed she was. Nobody important, nobody powerful. Just the naive wife he could discard whenever it suited him. The woman who'd serve her purpose and then be cast aside without consequence. The presentation began. Joey took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He talked about innovation and vision and changing the world. He was good at this, charismatic, convincing. She could see people leaning forward, getting excited about whatever he was selling. She'd heard this speech before, practiced it with him, edited his slides, helped him refine his pitch. She'd given him everything he needed to succeed, and he'd repaid her by screwing his assistant in a back room while calling her naive. Shana finished her second glass of champagne. Did not get a third. She needed to stay sharp, clear, in control. Larissa appeared from somewhere, slipping into the crowd near the stage. Her dress was still slightly wrinkled. Her lipstick was smudged. She looked satisfied and smug, like a cat who'd caught something small and helpless. When Larissa's eyes found Shiana, she smiled. That same cruel, triumphant smile from the office. Then she turned her attention back to Joey, watching him with an expression that made her feelings obvious to anyone who cared to look. Did everyone know? Shiana wondered. Were she and Joey the only ones pretending this was a real marriage? Did people at these events exchange knowing glances when they saw the devoted wife who had no idea her husband was sleeping with his assistant? The thought made her sick. Joey finished his presentation to thunderous applause. People rushed to congratulate him. He was instantly surrounded, his attention pulled in a dozen directions. This was what he'd wanted, what he'd worked for. His moment of glory. Shiana slipped away from the crowd, found a quiet corner where she could watch without being noticed. She pulled out her phone, scrolled mindlessly, tried to look occupied. Her mind was racing. What did she do now? Confront him? Leave? Pretend it never happened? The numbness was wearing off, replaced by something that felt like rage wrapped in ice. 3 years. 3 years of her life. 3 years of sacrifice and compromise and making herself smaller so he could feel bigger. And this is how it ended. With her standing alone at his triumph, watching him celebrate with people who didn't even know she existed as anything more than an accessory. Someone approached, an older woman in an elegant black dress. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine," Shiana said automatically. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." The woman studied her face with the kind of perception that comes from years of reading people. "Men are fools," she said quietly, "and the smart ones know it. The dangerous ones don't." Then she was gone, disappearing back into the crowd. The party continued for hours. Shiana moved through it like a ghost herself, present but not really there. People tried to talk to her. She responded appropriately, made the right sounds, smiled at the right moments. Inside, she was cataloging everything, every sacrifice, every compromise. Every time she'd swallowed her own needs to accommodate his. The apartment they'd moved to because he needed a better location. Her graduate program she'd quit because he needed support. The wedding she'd kept quiet because he needed to appear available. The friends she'd left behind. The family she'd distanced herself from. The dreams she'd abandoned. All of it given away freely because she'd believed in him, in them. In the future, they were supposedly building together. It was all built on lies. Around midnight, the crowd began to thin. Joey was still surrounded by admirers and potential investors. Larissa stayed close to him, playing the dutiful assistant, while her eyes promised things that had nothing to do with work. Shiana collected her coat, ordered a car, walked out without saying goodbye. Joey didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care enough to follow. The drive home was silent. The driver asked if she'd had a good evening. She said yes. Another lie to add to the collection. The apartment was dark and empty when she arrived. She stood in the living room for a long moment, still wearing the red dress and her grandmother's necklace, looking at the space she'd tried so hard to make into a home. Then she walked to Joey's office, the room he kept locked. The room he said was private because he needed space to work without distractions. She'd never pushed, never questioned. Trusted him to have boundaries and respected them, but trust was gone now, and boundaries were for people who deserved them. The door wasn't actually locked, just closed. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe he'd never expected her to try. Shiana pushed it open and turned on the light. His desk was covered in papers, files, folders. She sat down in his chair and began to read. Outside, the city slept. Inside, Shiana discovered exactly who she'd married, and it was so much worse than she'd imagined. She spent the night cataloging every lie he ever told. By dawn, she had a list that would end him. Chapter 3. the long game. Revenge, she decided, should be served in courses, each more exquisite than the last. Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Shiana was still in Joey's office, surrounded by papers that told a story so damning she almost couldn't believe it. Almost. But the evidence was right there in black and white, in his own handwriting, in emails he'd never expected her to read. The truth spread before her like a map of betrayal, each document a landmark on the journey of his deception. Joey Godfrey hadn't married her for love. He'd married her for connections, for access, for the doors her name could open, and the money he thought he could eventually access. The private investigator's report was dated 6 months before their wedding. Pages and pages of research about her family, about the Jones name, about the industrial empire her grandmother had built from steel and determination. He'd known exactly who she was, had planned the entire romance like a military campaign, identifying her as a target and pursuing her with calculated precision. The report even included photographs of her, taken without her knowledge. Pictures of her leaving the library where they'd first met, entering coffee shops, walking through parks. He'd been watching her before he'd ever said hello. There were notes in the margins. Plays down wealth, use that. Wants to be loved for. Herself, perfect. Keep. Marriage quiet until positioned properly. Introduce. To investors slowly. Don't spook her. Family estranged, good. Less interference. Each note was written in Joey's handwriting, turning what she'd thought was their love story into a cold business transaction. Shiana felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. Heartbreak required the death of something real, something that had existed and been lost. This was just clarity, the understanding that she'd never been a person to him, just a resource, a stepping stone, a means to an end, a mark to be conned. She kept reading, her hands steady even as her world continued to crack apart. Bank statements showed money disappearing from their joint account, transferred to offshore accounts she'd never known existed. Small amounts at first, just a few $100s here and there, easy to miss in the flow of normal expenses. Then larger amounts as he grew confident she wasn't paying attention. By the end, he'd stolen over $50,000, money she'd deposited, thinking they were building a future together. Loan applications with her signature forged so perfectly she almost believed she'd signed them herself. He'd practiced, she realized. There were pages in a notebook showing attempts at her signature, each one closer to the real thing, until he'd mastered the curves and angles of her handwriting. The dedication to fraud was almost impressive in its thoroughness. Emails to investors dropping her family name like bait, implying connections he had no right to claim. "I'm working closely with the Jones family on this venture," he'd written to one. "My partner has deep ties to Jones Industrial Holdings," he'd told another. "We're backed by one of the most powerful families in the country," he'd claimed to a third. All lies, all using her name to steal credibility he hadn't earned, and letters. Dozens of letters to Larissa going back 18 months. Love letters, if you could call them that. Crude promises about what they'd do together once he'd extracted everything useful from his naive wife. Plans for a future that had always been meant to exclude Shiana. "Once the launch is successful, and I've secured the right connections, I'll file for divorce," he'd written just 2 months ago. "She'll be devastated, but honestly she's been dead weight for a while now. You and I can finally stop hiding." Dead weight. She'd given him everything, and he'd seen her as dead weight. Shiana photographed every document, every email, every forged signature. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. The girl who'd walked into that launch event was gone. What remained was someone colder. Someone who understood that love was a weapon, and she'd been letting Joey stab her with it for 3 years. Never again. She heard the door open. Joey was home. Shauna gathered the papers and returned them to exactly where she'd found them. Turned off the office light. Walked out into the living room like she'd just woken up. Joey stood in the doorway, looking exhausted and guilty, and like he'd been practicing apologies all night. When he saw her, relief flooded his face. "Shiana, thank God I've been trying to call you. Where did you go last night?" "I came home. Without saying goodbye? People were asking about you. It looked strange." "Did it?" Her voice was flat. "How unfortunate for you." He moved closer, reaching for her. She stepped back. He froze. "About what you saw," he started. "It was a mistake. A stupid, drunken mistake. Larissa and I got caught up in the moment, the excitement. It didn't mean anything." "How long?" "What?" "How long have you been sleeping with her?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's not like that. It's complicated." "How long?" "A few months. Maybe longer. I don't know. It just happened. But it doesn't change how I feel about you. You're my wife. That matters. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, being your wife means being lied to and cheated on and called naive behind my back." "You heard that?" He had the audacity to look embarrassed. "I was just talking. Trying to impress her. It didn't mean anything. So you don't think I'm naive?" "No, yes. You're trusting. That's not a bad thing." Shiana studied him. This man she'd loved. This man she'd built her life around. She was seeing him clearly for the first time, and what she saw was someone small. Someone who'd needed her to be smaller so he could feel big. "I want you to leave," she said. "Shiana, come on. Let's talk about this. Let's work through it. There's nothing to work through. You cheated. You lied. You've been planning to leave me. So save us both time and leave now." His face hardened. "This is my apartment too." "Actually, it's not. Check the lease. My name, my deposit. My first 6 months of rent. You've been living in my apartment." She watched him process that. Watched him realize she'd been supporting them in ways he'd never known. "Fine," he said. "I'll get a hotel for a few days. Give you time to cool down. But Shiana, don't do anything stupid. Don't make this bigger than it is." "Bigger than it is," she repeated. "You mean like making it public? Telling people you're married? That kind of bigger?" He went pale. "Our marriage is private. We agreed to keep it quiet. You wanted to keep it quiet. I went along with it because I thought I was supporting your dreams. But now I understand. You wanted to keep it quiet so you could pretend to be available. So you could play the successful young entrepreneur without a wife cramping your style. That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Joey. But I'm done caring about what's fair to you." He grabbed his jacket, stuffed some clothes into a bag, moved through the apartment like he owned it. At the door, he turned back. "You'll forgive me," he said. "You always do. That's who you are." Then he was gone. Shauna stood alone in the apartment and felt something settle in her chest. He thought he knew her, thought she was predictable, forgiving, easy to manipulate. He had no idea who he'd just made an enemy of. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts to a number she hadn't called in 3 years. Her mother, Wilhelmina Jones, the woman Shiana had distanced herself from because she'd wanted to prove she could make it on her own. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Shiana?" Her mother's voice cracked something in her carefully constructed armor. Tears came sudden and overwhelming. "Mama," she said, "I need to come home." "Then come home, baby. We've been waiting." By evening, Shiana was driving out of the city, away from the apartment and the life she'd built on lies. The skyline disappeared in her rearview mirror. Ahead, the road stretched toward the estate she'd grown up on, the family she'd abandoned, the name she'd tried to outrun. She'd wanted to prove she didn't need them, didn't need the money or the power or the protection that came with being a Jones. But she'd been wrong, and now she was done being wrong. Now, she was going to show Joey Godfrey what happened when you betrayed someone who had an empire at her back. Now, she was going to destroy him. She decided to never let anyone play her for a fool again, and the first lesson would be carved in Joey's ruins. Chapter 4. The Paper Trail. Power lives in details. The passwords he thought she'd forgotten. The files he thought she'd never check. The estate looked exactly as Shiana remembered. Iron gates that opened automatically when her car approached. A driveway lined with oak trees, older than the country itself. The house rising at the end, like something from a dream, all stone and windows and history. She'd forgotten how beautiful it was, how safe it felt. Her mother was waiting on the front steps. Wilhelmina Jones, elegant in a simple dress, her face carved with worry and love. When Shiana got out of the car, her mother opened her arms and Shiana fell into them like a child. "I've got you," Wilhelmina murmured. "You're safe now?" They went inside. The house smelled like lemon polish and roses and old wood. Familiar smells from a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. Shiana had left this place determined to make her own way. Now she was crawling back, broken and humiliated. "You're not broken," her mother said, as if reading her thoughts. "You're angry. There's a difference." They sat in the study, the room where family business had been conducted for generations. Shiana told her mother everything. About meeting Joey, about falling in love, about hiding who she was to see if he'd love her anyway. About the marriage kept secret, the dreams abandoned, the 3 years spent making herself smaller. Then she told her about the launch event, about finding Joey with Larissa, about the files in his office that proved it had all been calculated from the beginning. Wilhelmina's face remained calm throughout, but her hands gripped her teacup hard enough that her knuckles went white. When Shiana finished, silence filled the study. Then her mother spoke, her voice deadly quiet. "He hunted you." "Yes. He researched our family, identified you as a target, pursued you deliberately." "Yes, and he's been stealing from you, using your name, forging your signature." "Yes." Wilhelmina set down her teacup with careful precision. Baby girl, I need you to understand something. What he did isn't just betrayal, it's fraud, it's identity theft, it's criminal. And the Jones family doesn't tolerate people who commit crimes against its members. I don't want him arrested. I just want him gone. Oh, honey. Her mother's smile was sharp as broken glass. We can do so much better than gone. Within an hour, the study was full. Uncle Desmond arrived first. Tall and imposing in a suit that probably cost more than Joey's car. He was a lawyer, the kind who made opposing counsel cry. Cousin Amara came next, brilliant and fierce, a forensic accountant who could find money hidden in places people didn't know existed. Finally, Langston Gray, her godfather, who sat on more boards than Shiana could count and knew everyone worth knowing. They were her family's inner circle. The people who protected the Jones legacy and eliminated threats. Shiana had become a threat to be eliminated. Now Joey was. "Tell them everything," her mother said. So Shiana did. She showed them the documents she'd photographed. The forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the emails to Larissa, the investigator's report proving Joey had targeted her deliberately. Desmond made notes, his pen scratching across legal pads. Amara opened her laptop and started tracing financial trails. Langston made quiet phone calls to people whose names Shiana recognized from news articles about powerful men making powerful decisions. "This is good," Desmond said finally. "This is very good." "Good?" Shiana asked. "How is any of this good?" Because it's prosecutable, documentable, provable. He's committed multiple felonies using your identity. We can destroy him legally without ever getting our hands dirty. I can trace every penny he's stolen," Amara added, fingers flying across her keyboard. "And I'm seeing patterns. This isn't the first time he's done this. There are transactions going back years, different names, same methods. He's a serial con artist." Langston finished his call and turned to Shiana. "I've been making inquiries about Joey Godfrey, calling people he's claimed as investors or partners. None of them know him well. He's been using your name, the Jones name, to get meetings, implying connections he doesn't have. It's been effective. People trust the Jones family. He's been trading on our reputation." The rage that had been simmering in Shiana's chest began to burn hotter. He hadn't just betrayed her personally. He'd weaponized her family's name against them. "What do we do?" she asked. Her mother looked at Desmond. "What are our options?" Several. We can file criminal charges and watch him go to prison. We can file civil suits and take everything he has. Or we can do something more creative. Define creative. Desmond smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. His company, the one he just launched. It's vulnerable right now, new, unstable, dependent on investor confidence. If that confidence disappears, the company collapses. And if we acquire enough shares, we can take control entirely. You want to take over his company, Shiana said slowly. I want you to take over his company. Use your inheritance to buy majority shares. Walk in as the new owner. Make him answer to you. And then remake it into something that actually works. The idea was audacious, ruthless, perfect. How long would it take? To acquire the shares? A few weeks if we move quietly. To execute the takeover. One board meeting. Shauna looked around the room at her family, at the people who'd been waiting 3 years for her to come home. They weren't judging her for leaving. They were ready to go to war for her return. Do it, she said. Take his company. Take everything. Show him what happens when you Hunter Jones. You're sure? Her mother asked. Once we start this, there's no going back. Shauna thought about Joey's face when he'd looked annoyed that she'd interrupted his affair. Thought about being called naive. Thought about 3 years of lies and manipulation and deliberate cruelty. I'm sure. I want him to understand exactly what he threw away. I want him to see me take everything he built on my back and make it better than he ever could. I want him to spend the rest of his life knowing he had access to everything he ever wanted and destroyed it through his own greed and stupidity. Her family smiled. They understood revenge. It ran in their blood. Then let's begin, Desmond said. They worked through the night. Amara traced money. Desmond built legal strategies. Langston made calls to investors, asking carefully worded questions about Joey's company, planting seeds of doubt. Wilhelmina coordinated everything, her mind sharp as it had been when she'd helped run the family empire before retiring. And Shiana sat in the middle of it all, learning, watching, preparing for war. By dawn, they had a plan. By the end of the week, they'd started acquiring shares in Joey's company. Small purchases from different investors, nothing large enough to raise alarms. By the end of the month, they'd control enough to matter. And Joey had no idea. He was too busy celebrating his successful launch, too busy with Larissa, too busy believing he'd gotten away with everything. He had no idea the trap was closing around him. That every day he woke up thinking he'd won was one day closer to losing everything. She learned he'd been using her, named to secure deals and loans, and decided. He'd learned what that name really meant. Chapter 5. The Call. Home. Some fortresses are built of stone. Hers was built of blood and legacy. The lawyers arrived at the estate 2 days after Shiana came home. Desmond had assembled the best team money could buy, people who specialized in fraud, identity theft, corporate takeovers. They set up in the library, turning it into a war room with files and laptops and legal documents spread across every surface. Maps of Joey's business connections covered one wall. Timelines of his fraudulent activities covered another. This wasn't just preparation. This was the systematic dismantling of a man who'd thought himself untouchable. Shiana sat through meeting after meeting, learning the law, learning her rights, learning exactly how much power she had when she stopped hiding from it. Each session revealed new aspects of Joey's crimes, new ways he'd exploited her trust, new evidence that he'd never loved her at all. He's committed at least 15 counts of identity theft, one lawyer explained, showing her highlighted documents spread across the conference table. Every loan application with your forged signature, every deal made using your family name without permission. Each one is a separate felony. Some jurisdictions would consider this organized fraud, which carries even heavier penalties. And the money he stole? Shiana asked, her voice steady even as rage burned in her chest. Grand larceny, fraud, wire fraud, since some transfers crossed state lines. We can prove he had intent from the beginning based on that investigator's report. A prosecutor would love this case. It's gift-wrapped, but Shiana didn't want prosecutors. Not yet. First, she wanted him to understand what he'd lost. She wanted him to see her, standing in the ruins of everything he'd tried to steal, holding all the power he'd tried to claim. Amara had been busy. She'd traced every dollar Joey had stolen, every account he'd hidden, every lie he'd told to investors about funding and partnerships. The picture that emerged was damning. Joey wasn't just a cheater. He was a con artist who'd been running variations of this scheme for years, refining his approach with each victim until he'd perfected the art of destruction. "I found 2 other women," Amara said, pulling up files on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she navigated through layers of documentation. "Before you. Same pattern. Romance, manipulation, theft. Both of them were too embarrassed to press charges. Both of them just wanted him gone. One of them lost her house. The other had to declare bankruptcy. He destroyed their lives and moved on without looking back." Sienna felt sick. She wasn't special, wasn't even unique, just the latest victim in a pattern, though she'd been the biggest target he'd attempted. "And Larissa?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "She's done this before, too. 3 times that I can find, possibly more. Different names, different states, always the same game. She and Joey have been working together for at least 2 years. They target wealthy women or men, drain them, then disappear. You were just the biggest score they'd attempted. If they'd succeeded in getting access to your full inheritance, they'd have vanished with millions." The cruelty of it took Sienna's breath away. Everything had been calculated. The meet cute at the library where she'd been studying alone. The whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet. The proposal that had made her cry with joy. Every moment she'd treasured, every memory she'd held close, had been choreographed to separate her from her money. She'd been nothing but a mark, a target, a job, except they'd failed, because she'd never told them about the real money. They'd been stealing thousands while she had access to billions. They'd been running a con that could have netted them a decent score, never knowing they were sitting on top of a fortune that would have changed their lives forever. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Langston had been working his own angle. He'd reached out to everyone Joey had claimed as an investor or partner, asking careful questions, planting seeds of doubt. The responses were illuminating and damning in equal measure. "He's been promising things he can't deliver," Langston reported during one evening meeting, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience in reading people and situations. Telling one investor he's secured funding from another who's never heard of him. Creating a shell game where everyone thinks they're part of something bigger than it is. He's good, I'll give him that. Very convincing, but it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no substance underneath. "So the company is built on lies," Shana said, though it wasn't really a question. "The company is built on air. There's no there, just Joey making promises and hoping to figure it out later. Classic con artist behavior, always one step ahead of the truth catching up. Perfect. That made what came next even easier. They wouldn't be destroying something real. They'd be exposing something fake. On the 5th day, Desmond called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the study. Shiana, Wilhelmina, Amara, Langston, and the assembled legal team. "We have 2 paths," Desmond began. "Criminal prosecution or corporate takeover. We can pursue both, but the timing matters. If we file criminal charges first, the takeover becomes complicated. If we take over the company first, the criminal charges become leverage for cooperation." "Meaning?" Sienna asked. "Meaning we take his company, we put you in control, and then we offer him a choice. Cooperate with the transition, and we don't press charges, or fight us, and we destroy him completely." Wilhelmina leaned forward. "You're assuming he'll cooperate. Men like Joey always cooperate when they understand they've lost. Right now, he thinks he's gotten away with everything. We need to show him he hasn't." Shana thought about it. Thought about Joey standing on that stage at his launch, talking about vision and integrity. Thought about him believing he'd fooled everyone. How do we take the company? Amara pulled up a presentation on her laptop. "We've been quietly buying shares for 3 weeks. Small purchases from different investors through different channels. As of this morning, we control 48%. We need 51% for majority control. Can we get it? Already in progress. 3 more investors have agreed to sell. By the end of the week, you'll own controlling interest. And then we call a board meeting. You walk in. You present the evidence of Joey's fraud. You force a vote to remove him as head of the company. And you take over. Shiana felt something electric run through her. This was real. This was happening. In a matter of days, she would own the company Joey had built on her back. What about his reaction? Wilhelmina asked. He won't take this quietly. He'll threaten lawsuits, Desmond said. He'll make accusations. He'll try to paint Shiana as a vindictive ex-wife. We're prepared for all of it. Every move he makes, we have 3 counter-moves ready. And Larissa? She'll disappear the moment things get difficult. That's her pattern. She's not loyal to Joey. She's loyal to money. When the money dries up, so will she. The plan was ruthless, efficient, exactly what the Jones family did when someone threatened one of their own. Shauna's mother reached over and took her hand. Are you ready for this, baby? Once we start, there's no stopping. His life will be destroyed, thoroughly, publicly, permanently. Shauna thought about the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago. Naive, trusting, desperate to be loved for herself. That girl would have hesitated, would have worried about being cruel, but that girl was gone. I'm ready, Shiana said. Let's destroy him, her family smiled. They'd been waiting for her to come home, waiting for her to remember who she was, waiting for her to stop playing small and embrace the power that had always been hers. The Jones family protected its own, and now they would teach Joey Godfrey what happened when you hunted one of them. Over the next few days, Shiana transformed. She stopped hiding, stopped apologizing for existing. She wore her grandmother's necklace every day, a reminder of the women who'd come before her. Women who'd built empires and crushed enemies and refused to be anyone but themselves. She trained with Desmond, learning how to present evidence in a boardroom. She worked with Amara, understanding the financial details she'd need to know as the new owner. She shadowed Langston, learning how to read people and anticipate their moves, and she waited, patient, focused, ready. Joey called several times, left voicemails asking her to come home, to talk, to work things out. She didn't respond. Let him wonder. Let him worry. He had no idea what was coming. On the morning they secured the final shares, giving Shiana 51% controlling interest. Desmond called her into the study. It's done, he said. You own the company. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Joey will be there, expecting routine business. Instead, he'll walk into his own execution. Will he bring lawyers? He can't afford lawyers, not good ones. He's been living beyond his means for months. The launch expenses, the affair with Larissa, the lifestyle he's been maintaining, he's actually broke. Shana felt a cold satisfaction. He'd stolen from her to fund his own destruction. That night, she stood in her grandmother's garden, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, maybe her grandmother was watching. Maybe she was proud. I understand now, Grandma, Shana whispered to the darkness. About men who love what you can give them. About making sure they know the difference. He never loved me. But that's okay, because I'm about to show him what he lost. The next morning, she dressed in a charcoal suit that whispered power and money, her grandmother's necklace at her throat, her hair pulled back in a style that meant business. She looked in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in boardrooms, someone who commanded respect, someone who didn't apologize for taking up space. She looked like a Jones. Desmond met her at the car. Ready? You're more than ready. Remember, you're not there to argue. You're not there to convince anyone. You're there to take what's already yours and make them understand it's over. I understand. They drove into the city, toward the building that housed Joey's company. The company that would be hers by the end of the day. Shiana felt no nervousness, no doubt, just cold, clear certainty. Joey had hunted her. Now she was about to show him what it felt like to be prey. Her powerful family stands behind her, ready to strike. and tomorrow the hunter becomes the hunted. Chapter 6. The Quiet Exit. She left the way ghosts do, present one moment, gone the next, leaving only cold air behind. Before the board meeting, before the confrontation, before everything changed, there was one more thing Shana needed to do. She needed to collect what remained of the life she'd left behind, the apartment, her belongings, the physical pieces of 3 years she'd spent, trying to be someone she wasn't, the tangible evidence of a chapter that needed closing. She needed to close that chapter properly. Desmond advised against it. Send movers. Don't go yourself. Don't risk a confrontation before we're ready. Joey's unpredictable right now, and we can't afford any complications that might jeopardize the takeover. But Shana knew Joey wouldn't be there. She'd been monitoring his social media, his calendar that he'd foolishly shared with her and never revoked access to. He'd sent her a text the night before. She'd finally looked at her messages after days of ignoring them, saying he'd given her space, and now they needed to talk. He'd be at his office all day, meeting with investors he claimed were ready to pour millions into his company, dealing with business that would supposedly change everything. The apartment would be empty. A hollow shell, just like their marriage had been. She took Raymond, the estate's head of security, with her anyway, just in case. Raymond had worked for the family for decades, had protected Shana since she was a child. He was quiet, observant, and capable of handling anything that might arise. The drive into the city felt different now. She wasn't running away. She was collecting what was hers and leaving everything else behind, drawing a line between who she'd been and who she was becoming. The apartment building looked smaller than she remembered. Ordinary, just another structure in a city full of them. The kind of place that had felt like a compromise when they'd moved in, but she'd convinced herself was temporary, a stepping stone to something better. Everything with Joey had been temporary, she realized now. Temporary and conditional. She'd just been too blind to see it, too desperate to believe in the fairy tale she'd been selling herself. She used her key. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt final. The apartment was dark and quiet, exactly as she'd left it 3 weeks ago. It smelled stale, like no one had opened a window or cleaned or cared about making it feel like home. Dust motes danced in the strips of light that came through the closed blinds. It had never been home. Just a stage set for a play where she hadn't known her real role. She'd been the fool, the mark, the supporting character in Joey's story. Shana moved through the rooms methodically. Bedroom first. She packed her clothes, the ones she'd bought, not the ones Joey had chosen for her. Those could stay. The dress he'd picked out for their anniversary because he said red wasn't her color. The shoes he'd selected because he preferred women in heels. The jewelry he'd given her, that she'd pretended to love, but had always felt like chains disguised as gifts. Let him give them to Larissa. Let her wear the costume Shana had finally shed. She took her books, her photos, the few personal items that meant something. Mementos from before Joey, reminders of who she'd been. Her grandmother's jewelry box with its velvet interior and hidden compartments. The letters from her mother she'd saved, even when she'd stopped reading them, too guilty about the distance she'd created to face her mother's love. Everything that was truly hers, everything that predated this disaster. In the closet, she found the red dress from the launch event. It hung there like an accusation, like evidence of her naivety. She'd worn it thinking it was the beginning of something new. Instead, it had marked the end of everything old. The death of the woman who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She left it hanging there. Let it rot. Let it serve as a monument to her stupidity, visible only to Joey and whatever woman came after her. The bathroom. She took her toiletries, left his. Separate even in the most mundane aspects of life. The kitchen. She'd bought most of the dishes during one optimistic afternoon when she'd thought setting up their home together meant something. But she didn't want them now. They'd served meals to a man who'd been planning her disposal while she'd been planning their future. Every plate and glass and fork carried the weight of lies she'd believed. Let him keep them all. Let him eat off dishes that reminded him of what he'd destroyed. Joey's office. She hesitated outside the door, her hand on the doorknob, then pushed it open. Everything was exactly as she'd left it that night when she'd discovered his secrets. The files were back in their drawers, organized and innocent-looking. The desk was organized with the careful precision of someone who believed order could hide chaos. But she knew what those drawers contained now, knew what kind of man worked in this room, knew the calculations he'd made and the lies he'd told from behind this desk. She took nothing from here. This was his space. His lies, his crimes. Let him drown in them. Let him sit in this room and remember what his greed had cost him. In the living room, she found signs of Larissa. A lipstick on the coffee table, the shade too bold for Shiana's taste. An earring under the couch, probably lost in haste or passion or both. A hair tie on the arm of the chair, blonde and foreign. She'd been here, Shiana realized with a cold clarity. Probably multiple times. Probably in Shiana's bed, wearing Shiana's robe, cooking in Shiana's kitchen, living the life Shiana had been forced out of, taking her place before Shiana had even fully vacated it. It should have hurt. Instead, Shiana felt nothing but a distant kind of disgust. Larissa could have it all. Could have Joey and his lies and his empty promises and his inevitable betrayal when someone with more money came along. She was welcome to every toxic piece of it. Welcome to the hollow victory of winning a man who wasn't worth having. By afternoon, Shiana's belongings were packed into boxes and bags. Her life reduced to what could fit in the back of a car. It was less than she'd expected. 3 years, and this was all she had to show for it. No, that wasn't right. She had more than this. She had clarity. She had strength. She had family who'd never stopped waiting for her to come home. And she had a plan that would give her everything Joey had tried to steal. Raymond helped carry the boxes down. "That everything, Miss Jones?" "Almost." Shiana went back upstairs one last time, stood in the center of the empty apartment and looked around. This place had held so much pain, so many lies, so many moments when she'd swallowed her own needs to accommodate his. She'd been so small here, so afraid of being too much, so desperate to be loved that she'd forgotten how to love herself. Never again. She pulled out her phone and typed a text to Joey, her first communication in 3 weeks. "I've removed my belongings from the apartment. The lease is in my name. I'll be terminating it. You have until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. Don't contact me again." She hit send, blocked his number. Then she walked out of the apartment and locked the door behind her, left her key on the counter inside. She wouldn't be coming back. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Raymond didn't ask questions, didn't offer commentary, just drove while Shiana watched the city disappear behind them. Her phone buzzed. Multiple times, Joey trying to call from different numbers. She blocked each one. Then she turned her phone off entirely. He was realizing what was happening. That she wasn't coming back, that he'd actually lost her. But he thought that was the worst of it. He thought the worst consequence would be a divorce and losing his convenient wife. He had no idea what was coming tomorrow. By evening, Shiana was back in her room at the estate, her belongings unpacked into closets and drawers that had always been hers. She'd been a guest in Joey's apartment. Here she was home. Her mother brought dinner to her room. They ate together in comfortable silence, the way they had when Shiana was young and the world was simpler. "How are you feeling?" Wilhelmina finally asked. "Lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." "Good, that's what closure feels like." "Is it over? Really over?" "The personal part is over. You've taken back what's yours and walked away from what isn't. Tomorrow is about something different. Tomorrow is about making sure he understands there are consequences for what he did." Shiana nodded. She understood. Personal revenge was small. What they were doing tomorrow was bigger. It was about justice, about showing Joey that some people couldn't be used and discarded without repercussions. That night, Shiana slept better than she had in weeks. No nightmares, no anxiety. Just deep, dreamless sleep in a bed that had been hers since childhood. And in the morning, She would walk into Joey's company and take everything he'd built on her back. In the morning, he would learn what it meant to cross a Jones. She moved out quietly, taking only what's legally hers, and left behind a silence that should have warned him everything had changed. Chapter 7. The Counter-Strike. War isn't won in battles, it's won in the preparation no one sees coming. The morning of the board meeting, Shiana woke before dawn. She'd slept well, dreamed of nothing, and opened her eyes feeling more clear-headed than she had in months. Today, everything changed. Today, Joey would learn exactly what he'd lost when he threw her away. Today, the hunter would discover he'd been stalking a predator all along. She dressed with care. The charcoal suit her mother had helped her select, tailored to perfection by someone who understood that power dressing meant looking like you belonged in rooms where decisions worth millions were made. A crisp white blouse that cost more than Joey's entire wardrobe. Heels that added 3 inches to her height and made her footsteps sound like authority. Her grandmother's necklace, of course. The diamonds caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the walls of her bedroom, each flash a reminder of generations of Jones women who'd built empires and crushed enemies. She studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger to the girl who'd hidden her identity to be loved. This woman didn't hide, didn't apologize, didn't make herself small for anyone's comfort. This woman looked like she could buy and sell companies before breakfast, then do it again after lunch just for practice, which technically she had. Desmond was waiting downstairs with coffee and final preparations. His suit was immaculate, his briefcase organized, his expression calm. He'd done this before, dismantled men who thought themselves untouchable. Joey would be no different from the others who'd underestimated the Jones family. "The board meets at 10, Desmond said, handing her a folder with the final documentation. Joey thinks it's routine business. Quarterly reviews, minor votes, standard procedures. He has no idea what's coming. Our sources say he's been bragging to people about how well things are going, how he's about to close another major deal. Who else knows? Just us. The board will be blindsided, but that works in our favor. They'll see the evidence fresh, react authentically. No time for Joey to spin stories or build defenses. No time for him to call in favors or manufacture explanations." Amara joined them, laptop bag over her shoulder, her expression fierce with anticipation. "I have everything ready. Financial forensics, trace transactions, documented fraud. It's airtight. I've triple-checked every number, verified every source. He can't claim any of this is falsified or exaggerated." Langston arrived last, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than some people's cars. Every inch of him radiating the kind of power that came from decades of sitting on boards and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I spoke with 3 board members this morning. Casual calls, nothing suspicious. Asked about their golf games, their families, how they're feeling about the company's direction. None of them have any loyalty to Joey. They'll vote with whoever makes the most sense." "And we make sense. And we make sense," Shauna repeated, feeling the truth of it. They weren't coming in with emotion or revenge. They were coming in with facts and law and the kind of power that moved mountains. "You make sense," Langston corrected gently. "You're not just bringing evidence of fraud. You're bringing capital, stability, and a name that means something." Joey brought chaos and lies. This won't even be close. Some of these board members have been nervous for months, sensing something was wrong but not sure what. You're giving them permission to act on their instincts. They drove into the city in 2 cars. Jana rode with her mother, who'd insisted on coming to watch her daughter reclaim her power. Wilhelmina had seen this before, had orchestrated similar takedowns when threats emerged against the family. She knew the rhythm of corporate warfare, understood the psychology of men who believed themselves invincible. Desmond, Amara, and Langston followed in the second vehicle, carrying the evidence that would end Joey's reign. Boxes of documents, hard drives full of trace transactions, testimony from the women he'd victimized before Shiana. Everything needed to prove that Joey Godfrey wasn't just a bad husband. He was a criminal who'd been getting away with it for far too long. The building that housed Joey's company was modern glass and steel, designed to look more important than it was. The lobby was marble and chrome, impressive on first glance, but hollow underneath. Like Joey himself, security recognized Desmond from previous visits and waved them through without question. They rode the elevator to the top floor, where the boardroom waited. "Nervous?" her mother asked quietly. "No," Shiana said, surprising herself with the truth. "I'm ready." The boardroom was empty when they arrived. They'd planned it that way. Get there early, set up, control the space before anyone else arrived. Desmond arranged documents at each seat. Amara set up her laptop for the presentation. Langston positioned himself by the door, ready to greet board members as they entered. Shiana walked to the head of the table, Joey's seat, the chair he'd occupied during every meeting, probably thinking he was untouchable. She sat down. It fit perfectly. Board members started arriving. They looked confused to see strangers in their meeting room. But Langston greeted each one by name, explained that there would be a special presentation before regular business. His calm authority prevented questions. Joey arrived last. Jana watched him walk in, laughing at something on his phone, completely unaware. He wore an expensive suit she knew he couldn't afford. Probably bought it with money he'd stolen from her. When he saw her sitting in his chair, he stopped dead. "Shiana, what are you doing here?" She didn't respond, just looked at him with the same expression she'd give any stranger. His face cycled through confusion, then recognition, then something like fear. "This is a private board meeting. You can't just—" "Everyone please take your seats," Desmond interrupted, his voice cutting through Joey's protests. "We have important business to discuss." The board members sat, looking between Joey and Shiana, clearly sensing drama but unsure of the details. Joey remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm calling security," he said. "Please do," Shiana replied. "They'll be interested to hear what we have to say." He pulled out his phone, started dialing. Desmond spoke again. "Mr. Godfrey, I suggest you sit down. What we're about to discuss concerns you directly. You'll want to hear it." Joey looked around the table, saw no support, and slowly sank into a chair at the opposite end from Shiana, as far from her as he could get. "Thank you all for coming," Shiana began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Shiana Jones, and as of 3 days ago, I became the majority shareholder of this company. I now control 51% of all shares." The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Joey shot to his feet. "That's impossible." "I would have been notified. Share transfers require nothing but willing sellers and available buyers," Desmond finished. "Which we had. Every transaction was legal and properly documented. Miss Jones now owns controlling interest." One of the board members, an older man named Harrison, looked at Joey. "Did you know about this?" "Of course not. This is corporate warfare. This is a hostile takeover. This is completely legal," Desmond said. "And before you protest further, Mr. Godfrey, I suggest you look at the documents in front of you. They explain exactly why Miss Jones has taken this action." Board members opened their folders. Shiana watched their faces as they read. So confusion turned to shock, turned to anger. They weren't stupid. They could see what Joey had been doing. "These are forged financial documents," one board member said slowly, "with Miss Jones's signature. These are loan applications using her identity," another added. "These are emails planning fraud," a third concluded. Joey's face had gone from red to white. "Those are fake. She's manufacturing evidence because I ended our relationship. This is revenge, pure and simple. Is it?" Amara spoke for the first time, opening her laptop. "Because I'm a forensic accountant, and I've traced every transaction, every forged signature, every false claim. It's all real, and it's all documented in ways that will hold up in court." She clicked through presentation slides showing bank transfers, offshore accounts, emails between Joey and Larissa, the investigators' report from before their wedding. The evidence was overwhelming. Harrison looked at Joey with disgust. "You've been stealing from the company? From investors?" I've been using available resources to grow the business, Joey tried. Sometimes that requires creative financing, and creative financing doesn't mean forging someone's signature, another board member snapped. That's fraud. That's a crime. Joey's lawyer facade was crumbling. This is all circumstantial. You can't prove I did anything wrong. Actually, Desmond said, we can prove all of it, which is why we're here. Miss Jones could have gone straight to the authorities. She could have had you arrested this morning. Instead, she's offering you a choice. Joey looked at Shiana. She met his gaze coldly. What choice? You resign immediately. You surrender all claims to this company. You cooperate fully with the transition. And in exchange, we don't press criminal charges. That's blackmail. That's mercy. More than you deserve. The room was silent. Every board member was watching Joey, waiting to see how he'd respond. Shiana could see him calculating, trying to find an angle, a way out. There wasn't one. I built this company, he said finally. Everything here exists because of me. You built it on fraud and stolen money, Shiana replied, which means it was never really yours. And now it's mine. Harrison cleared his throat. I move that we vote to remove Joey Godfrey as head of this company, effective immediately. All in favor? Every hand went up, except Joey's. The motion passes, Harrison said. Mr. Godfrey, you're done here. Joey looked around the table, seeing no sympathy anywhere. Then he looked at Shiana, and something broke in his face. I loved you, he said desperately. I know I messed up, but I did love you. Doesn't that matter? Shiana felt nothing. No, it doesn't. Security appeared at the door. Langston had called them up during the meeting. They approached Joey carefully. Sir, we need you to leave the building. This is my company. Not anymore, Shiana said quietly. Now it's mine. Joey tried to argue, tried to push past security, tried to make one last stand. But there was nothing left to fight with. No allies, no leverage, no power. Security escorted him out. His voice echoed down the hallway, shouting threats and accusations that would go nowhere. Then he was gone. The board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Harrison spoke. Miss Jones, what happens now? Shiana stood, walked to the windows overlooking the city. Her city now, her company, her future. Now we rebuild. We make this company legitimate. We do real work with real products. We prove that success doesn't have to be built on lies. She turned back to face the room. Anyone who wants to be part of that, stay. Anyone who can't handle new leadership, leave now with severance and good recommendations. But if you stay, you work for me. And I don't tolerate fraud, theft, or dishonesty. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. No one moved. Good, Shiana said. Then let's begin. At the next board meeting, she arrived unannounced, and by the time security escorted him out screaming, everyone understood that queens don't negotiate with thieves. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Destruction takes minutes. Building something better from the ruins takes everything you have left. The first week, as owner of what had been Joey's company, was brutal. Shiana discovered just how deep the rot went. Half the employees had been lied to about pay and benefits. Investors had been promised returns that were mathematically impossible. The actual product Joey had been developing didn't work and probably never would. She could have shut it all down, taken the loss and walked away. But that would mean Joey's victims, the employees who'd believed in him, the investors he'd conned, would lose everything too. And Shiana didn't punish people for being fooled by a liar. She'd been fooled by him herself, so she rebuilt. She brought in new leadership. People recommended by Langston, vetted by Desmond, people who knew how to run companies instead of just talking about it. She restructured the entire operation, cutting the lies and building something real. The employees who stayed were terrified at first. They'd been through so much chaos with Joey that they didn't trust new management. But Shiana didn't blame them. She called an all-staff meeting her second day. I know you're scared, she told them. I know you've been lied to and manipulated. Joey Godfrey built this company on fraud, and you've been victims of that fraud just like everyone else. I'm here to fix it. One brave soul raised their hand. Are we all getting fired? No. If you were doing your job honestly and well, you keep your job. If you were helping Joey commit fraud, we need to talk. But most of you were just trying to work and survive. I respect that. Slowly, carefully, trust began to build. The harder part was the investors. They'd poured money into promises Joey couldn't keep. Some wanted their money back immediately. Some threatened lawsuits. Some just wanted answers. Shauna met with each one personally, showed them the evidence of what Joey had done, offered them a choice: take their money back now at a loss, or stay invested in the new vision and potentially make it back over time. Most stayed, not because they trusted her yet, but because they had no better options. Amara worked miracles with the finances. She untangled Joey's web of lies and found assets he'd hidden, money he'd squirreled away, resources he'd lied about. She recovered enough to stabilize the company for the short term. But long term, that required something the company had never had, a real product that actually worked. Shauna spent hours with the engineering team, learning what they'd been trying to build, understanding why it wasn't working. The problem wasn't talent. The problem was that Joey had been pushing them toward the flashy instead of the functional, the impressive instead of the useful. What would you build if no one was telling you what to build? Shauna asked them. The answers were brilliant, practical, achievable, everything Joey's vision hadn't been. Build that, she told them. Build something that actually works. We'll figure out how to sell it later. They looked at her like she'd handed them permission to breathe. Within a month, the company was transformed. Different name. Shauna rebranded it as Jones Meridian Technologies, removing every trace of Joey's influence. Different leadership, different mission, different culture. It wasn't easy. There were days Shauna worked 18 hours straight, learning on the fly, making decisions that terrified her. There were nights she lay awake wondering if she'd bitten off more than she could chew. But she never quit. Jones women didn't quit. By the second month, they had their first real client. A small contract, nothing huge, but it was based on actual work they could actually deliver. The team celebrated like they'd won the lottery. By the third month, word started spreading. Jones Meridian was reliable, honest. They delivered what they promised. Novel concepts in an industry full of people like Joey. More clients came. Bigger contracts. Real revenue instead of Joey's smoke and mirrors. And Shauna discovered something unexpected. She was good at this. Leading people. Making decisions. Building something that mattered. She'd spent 3 years making herself small for Joey. Now she was learning what it felt like to be exactly as big as she actually was. The press noticed. Articles started appearing about the mysterious heiress who'd taken over a failing startup and turned it into something legitimate. Some framed it as revenge. Some called her a savior. Most just marveled at the transformation. Shauna did interviews carefully. She never mentioned Joey by name, never detailed what he'd done to her personally. Just talked about finding a company in crisis and choosing to fix it instead of abandoning it. Why? One journalist asked. You could have just shut it down, taken the loss, moved on, because that would have hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt, Shauna answered. The employees who believed in something that turned out to be a lie. The investors who were conned. They deserved better, so I gave them better. The article that followed painted her as a combination of savior and warrior. A woman who fought for others while claiming her own power. Women started reaching out. Strangers who'd been through similar betrayals, who'd been used and discarded by men like Joey. They thanked Shauna for showing that survival was possible, that you could come back stronger. Shauna was overwhelmed by it. She'd just been trying to salvage her own dignity. She hadn't meant to become a symbol, but Amara told her to embrace it. You're showing people what's possible. That's powerful. Don't run from it. So Shauna leaned in. She spoke at conferences about ethical leadership. She mentored young women trying to break into male-dominated industries. She used her platform to amplify voices that had been silenced. She became exactly what she'd accused Joey of pretending to be. someone who actually made a difference. 6 months after taking over the company, Shiana stood in the office that had been Joey's and looked out at the city below. The company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Revenue was up, clients were happy, employees actually enjoyed coming to work. She'd taken Joey's failure and turned it into something he'd never achieved, actual success. Her mother came to visit, touring the offices, meeting the staff. Afterward, they had dinner in Shiana's office while the sun set over the city. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Wilhelmina said. "Would she? I didn't build this from scratch. I just fixed someone else's mess. You built something from nothing. Joey had nothing, just lies and stolen money. You built something real. That's harder than starting from scratch." Shiana thought about that. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe creating something from ruins was harder than creating something from nothing. The desk phone rang. Reception calling after hours, unusual. "Miss Jones, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. His name is Joey Godfrey." Shauna's chest tightened. 6 months, and this was the first time Joey had tried to see her. She'd heard through the grapevine that his life had collapsed completely. No job, no money. Living with his parents. Larissa had disappeared the moment his money ran out, exactly as predicted. Part of Shiana wanted to refuse to see him, but another part was curious. What could he possibly want? "Send him up," she said. Her mother raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." 5 minutes later, Joey walked into her office. He looked terrible. Thin, unshaven, wearing clothes that didn't fit right. His eyes were hollow, desperate. He looked like someone who'd lost everything, because he had. "Shiana," he said, his voice cracking. "Thank you for seeing me." She didn't respond, just looked at him, waited. "I heard what you've done with the company. It's incredible. It's everything I tried to build, but better. You're amazing." Still, she said nothing. "I came to tell you I'm sorry. I know I destroyed us. I know I hurt you. I was stupid and selfish, and I threw away the only real thing in my life. I'm so sorry." Shiana leaned back in her chair, in her office, in her company. "Is there something you need, Joey?" He flinched at her tone. Cold, professional, the way she'd talk to any stranger. "I'm broke. Completely. I can't find work. My name is toxic. I lost everything. I was wondering if you might have any positions available, anything. I'd work in the mailroom. I'd clean toilets. I just need something." The audacity took her breath away. He'd stolen from her, cheated on her, tried to destroy her. And now he wanted her to save him. "No," she said simply, "please. I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to turn. I'm begging you." The answer is no. "After everything we meant to each other, after 3 years, you're just going to let me suffer. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices. There's a difference." He started crying. Actual tears. "Please, Shiana, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. Please, have mercy." She stood up. "Mercy is why you're not in prison. Mercy is why I didn't press charges. But mercy doesn't mean giving you a place in the life I built from what you tried to destroy. You made your choices. Now you live with them." She walked to the door, opened it. "Goodbye, Joey. Don't come back here again." He left, still crying, still begging. She watched him go and felt nothing but relief that this chapter was finally, completely closed. She rebranded the company in her own name and built it bigger, smarter, more powerful than his lies ever could have been. Chapter 9. The Rise. Success, she learned, wasn't about destroying enemies. It was about building something they couldn't touch. A year after taking over the company, Shiana looked around the new headquarters and barely recognized her life. Jones Meridian Technologies had moved to a bigger building, hired 3 times the staff, and secured contracts Joey had only dreamed about. The company wasn't just surviving, it was leading, and Shiana had done that. Not her family name, though it helped. Not her money, though that helped too. But her vision, her leadership, her refusal to accept anything less than excellence. The transformation had been noted. Business magazines wrote features about her. Industry conferences invited her to speak. Other entrepreneurs asked for mentoring. She'd become someone who mattered in rooms that had never heard of Joey Godfrey. The invitations came daily now. Speaking requests, interview requests, women asking if she'd considered joining their boards or advising their startups. The best part? She'd done it ethically, no fraud, no theft, no lies, just hard work and smart decisions and a team that believed in the mission. Every contract they signed was built on trust earned through delivery. Every relationship was founded on honesty instead of manipulation. The industry noticed. Clients who'd been burned by people like Joey appreciated working with someone whose word actually meant something. The employees from Joey's era barely recognized the place. "It's like night and day," one told her during a quarterly review. "With him, we were always worried about when everything would collapse. We never knew if our paychecks would clear or if we'd come in one day to find the doors locked. With you, we're building something that lasts, something we can be proud to tell our families about." That mattered more than any profit margin, more than any award or recognition. Knowing that people felt secure in what they'd built together meant everything. Shiana implemented policies Joey would have hated. Profit sharing so employees benefited when the company did well. Transparent financials so no one could hide theft or fraud. Regular all-hands meetings where people could ask tough questions and get honest answers. She established mentorship programs where senior employees guided newer ones, creating a culture of learning instead of competition. Every decision was made with the question, does this serve our people or just our profits? "You're giving away too much," one of the new board members warned during a quarterly meeting. Profit sharing cuts into investor returns. These programs cost money that could go to shareholders. "Happy employees work harder," Siana countered, her voice firm but patient. "They stay longer, which means we don't waste money on constant recruitment and training. They believe in what we're building, which means they give their best work instead of just doing the minimum. They recommend us to talented friends, which means we get better applicants. That's worth more than a few percentage points on a quarterly report." The numbers proved her right. Retention was high. Productivity was higher. Jones Meridian was becoming known as an excellent place to work, which attracted even better talent. Recruiters called constantly, trying to poach employees, but most stayed. They'd found something rare, a company that valued them as people, not just resources. Women started reaching out specifically to work there. They'd read the articles, knew the story, wanted to be part of something led by a woman who'd turned betrayal into power. Shiana received dozens of applications weekly from women who'd been overlooked at other companies, passed over for promotions they'd earned, told they weren't the right fit for leadership roles. Shiana hired carefully. She wasn't interested in filling quotas or making statements. She wanted the best people for each role. But when the best people happened to be women who'd been overlooked elsewhere, she was happy to give them opportunities. She understood what it felt like to have your capabilities dismissed by people too blind to see them. One woman, an engineer named Jessica, told Shiana during her interview, "I've been trying to break into leadership for years, but every company I've worked at promoted men who knew less than me. They said I wasn't aggressive enough or didn't project authority. What they meant was I wasn't a man. I'm tired of being brilliant and invisible." "You're hired," Shiana said without hesitation. "And if you're as good as your resume suggests, you'll be running a team within 6 months." Jessica ran a team within 3 months. Her work was brilliant. Her leadership was strong. She proved what Shiana had always known: talent has no gender. Within a year, Jessica's team had the highest performance metrics in the company and the lowest turnover rate. She became exactly what Shiana wanted to cultivate: proof that excellence thrived when given the chance. Jones Meridian became a model. Other companies studied their culture, sending executives to tour the offices and understand how they'd built something so different. Business schools taught case studies about the turnaround, analyzing how Siana had transformed a fraudulent operation into an ethical success. Women entrepreneurs pointed to Siana as proof that you could succeed while doing the right thing. Students wrote papers about her leadership style. Conferences requested her as a keynote speaker. The attention was overwhelming sometimes. Siana had never wanted to be famous or important. She just wanted to fix what Joey broke and prove she could. But fame found her anyway. Photographers waited outside the building. Journalists requested exclusive interviews. Social media dissected every decision she made, every outfit she wore, every word she spoke in public. But Amara told her to embrace it. You're inspiring people. Women who thought they had to choose between success and integrity are seeing you prove they can have both. Women who've been betrayed are seeing you show them how to rebuild. Don't underestimate that impact. So Siana started mentoring. Young women who wanted to start companies but didn't know how. Women who'd been betrayed and didn't know how to rebuild. Women who'd been told they weren't enough and needed to hear from someone who'd been there. She set aside hours every week for mentorship calls, reviewed business plans, offered advice based on hard-won experience. She told them her story, not as a victim, as a survivor who'd chosen to become a victor. She was honest about the pain, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, about the moments she'd wanted to give up. But she was also honest about the power that came from refusing to stay down. The worst thing that ever happened to me, she told one group of young entrepreneurs, taught me who I was. I spent 3 years trying to be small enough for someone else's ego. I twisted myself into shapes that didn't fit, dimmed my light so his wouldn't look so weak in comparison. When that shattered, when I finally had to face the truth, I got to find out how big I actually was. And I'm bigger than I ever imagined, stronger than I knew, more capable than anyone told me I could be. That knowledge is worth more than any amount of money. The audience stood and applauded. Some were crying. Young women approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of being made small, of discovering their strength, of learning to take up the space they deserved. Siana looked out at those faces and understood. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd been underestimated, betrayed, discarded. She was showing them what was possible, showing them that the end of one chapter could be the beginning of something greater, that was worth more than any amount of money or success. That was legacy. Meanwhile, Joey's reputation was destroyed. Not because Siana had destroyed it. She'd never publicly detailed what he'd done to her personally. She'd maintained dignified silence about the intimate betrayals, focusing only on the professional fraud in any public forum. But because truth has a way of emerging, the investors he'd conned talked. The employees he'd lied to talked. The women he'd targeted before Siana found each other and compared notes. The pattern of fraud became impossible to hide. He became a cautionary tale. The entrepreneur who'd shot himself in the foot by being too greedy to see what he had. Business schools used him as an example of what not to do. Ethics professors cited his case when discussing the long-term consequences of short-term thinking. He was the ghost story entrepreneurs told each other. This is what happens when you forget that reputation takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Siana occasionally heard updates through the grapevine. Joey was working retail, living with his parents, still trying to convince people he'd been wronged instead of accepting responsibility for his choices. Still telling anyone who'd listened that his ex-wife had ruined him out of spite. Conveniently forgetting that she'd had the power to send him to prison, and hadn't. He'd become exactly what he feared. Irrelevant. She felt no satisfaction in his fall, no joy in his suffering, just indifference. He'd become irrelevant to her life, a footnote in someone else's story of rising from ashes. The city took notice of what she'd built. Local magazines featured her in their annual Power Women issues, photographing her in the office she'd redesigned to be welcoming instead of intimidating. Networking groups invited her to speak at their events, where hundreds of people showed up to hear how she transformed failure into triumph. Young professionals wanted to know her secret to success, asked her questions about work-life balance and dealing with imposter syndrome and navigating male-dominated industries. "There's no secret," she told them honestly. "Just work and refusing to compromise yourself for anyone. Know your worth and don't let anyone convince you to accept less." That's not a business strategy. That's a life strategy. By the second year, Jones Meridian was worth 10 times what Joey's company had been worth at its peak. Real value based on actual contracts and genuine innovation. Not smoke and mirrors, but substance. Shiana stood in the lobby of her building and looked at the logo on the wall. Her name, her company, her legacy. She'd walked through fire and emerged not burned, but tempered, stronger, clearer, more herself than she'd ever been. Joey had tried to break her. Instead, he'd freed her to become exactly who she was meant to be. And that, Shiana realized, was the ultimate victory. Women across the city looked up to her as a symbol of strength, and she wore that crown with grace, knowing she'd earned every diamond. Chapter 10, The Crown. Closure, she discovered, wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing what deserved space in your story. 2 years after the launch event where everything shattered, Shiana stood on the rooftop of the Jones Meridian headquarters. The party below celebrated their latest achievement, a partnership that would revolutionize their industry. Music drifted up from the floor below, laughter, success. She'd built this, from ashes and betrayal and a determination not to let Joey Godfrey define her. She'd built something that mattered. "Quite a view," her mother said, joining her at the edge. The city spread out before them, lights twinkling like promises. "It's surreal sometimes," Shiana admitted. 2 years ago I was falling apart. Now I'm standing here with everything I could want. You earned it. Every single bit." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration below. Employees who believed in the mission, clients who trusted them, a company that had become more than Shiana had dreamed possible. "Are you happy?" Wilhelmina asked. Shiana considered the question. Was she happy, or was she just successful? There was a difference. "I'm content," she said finally. "Proud, grateful, happy. I'm working on that part. You've been so focused on building the company that you've forgotten to build a life." "Mama, the company is my life. The company is part of your life. But you need more than work, baby. You need people who matter. Experiences that fill you up. Joy." Shauna knew her mother was right. She'd thrown herself into the business as a way to avoid dealing with the personal devastation Joey had left behind. And it had worked. But now the business was stable, thriving. She'd proven everything she needed to prove. What came next?
"I'm thinking about it," Shiana said.
"About what I want beyond this? I'm just not sure yet. Take your time. You're still young. You have years to figure it out." They returned to the party. Shiana moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, making small talk, playing the role of the successful CEO. She was good at it now. Comfortable in this skin in a way she'd never been comfortable as Joey's wife. She was heading toward the bar when she saw him. Joey Godfrey, standing by the entrance, looking completely out of place in cheap clothes among the elegant crowd. He was thinner than when she'd seen him in her office a year ago. His eyes were desperate. Shiana's first instinct was to have security remove him, but something stopped her. Maybe the need to see him one last time and prove to herself that he held no power over her anymore. He saw her. Recognition flooded his face, followed by desperate hope. He moved toward her quickly, pushing through the crowd. "Shiana," he said, his voice cracking. "Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd see me. I've been trying to reach you for months. Please just give me a minute." "Just 1 minute." She stopped walking, looked at him with the same expression she'd give any stranger who'd interrupted her evening. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," Joey continued, words tumbling out frantically. "I know I destroyed everything. But I'm drowning, Shiana. I've lost everything. my career, my reputation. I can't find work. I can't move forward. I'm completely broke. Living with my parents. Working retail jobs that won't even give me full-time hours. Shiana's face remained expressionless. She said nothing. I needed to see you, he pressed on, desperation making his voice rise. To tell you I understand now what I threw away. To ask if there's any chance you could help me. You have all the power now. You could give me a recommendation, or maybe a job here, anything. I'd work in the mailroom. I'd do anything, please. She looked at him. Through him, her silence was absolute. I'm begging you, Joey said, and now tears were streaming down his face. People around them had stopped talking, were watching the scene unfold. I know I was terrible to you. I know I betrayed you in every possible way. But please have mercy. I need you to forgive me. I need you to understand that I was broken and stupid, and I made terrible mistakes. Please, Shiana, please. He was fully crying now, making a scene, his voice breaking with desperation. I loved you, he said, the words coming out like a sob. I did love you in my own broken way. Doesn't that mean anything? Please, I'm begging you. I'm on my knees here. Please help me. Please forgive me. Please don't let me drown. Please. Shiana looked at this man who'd consumed so much of her life, who'd made her doubt herself, who'd tried to steal everything she had, who'd called her naive while planning her destruction. She felt nothing, no anger, no pity, no connection at all. She looked at him for one more moment, her face betraying nothing. Then she walked past him. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge his begging, didn't give him the satisfaction of her anger or her pity or even her contempt. She just walked past like he was invisible, like he was air, like he had never mattered at all. Security reached him as she moved away. She heard them taking his arms, heard Joey calling her name, heard the desperation in his voice, heard him begging and crying and making promises he'd never keep. She didn't look back. She walked into the crowd, into her life, into her future. And Joey Godfrey was nothing but a voice fading behind her. The party continued. Shiana accepted a glass of champagne, talked with clients, laughed with employees. No one needed to know that the desperate man security had just removed was the reason she'd built all of this. Later, much later, when the party had ended and the guests had gone home, Shiana stood alone in her office. The city lights twinkled below. Her city, her company, her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, though she suspected she knew who it was. She deleted it without reading. Blocked the number. Joey was part of her past. A painful chapter that had taught her everything she needed to know about her own strength. But he didn't belong in her present. And he certainly didn't belong in her future. The next morning, Shiana received a text from someone she'd met briefly at the party. Michael Hussey, an architect who'd designed the community center the company had helped fund. He mentioned his 4 boys, quadruplets named Peter, Reed, Johnny, and Ben, who'd been fascinated by the building's design. Would you be interested in coffee sometime? He'd asked. I'd love to hear more about your vision for community spaces. Shiana had said maybe, had taken his number, hadn't been ready to trust anyone enough to build something new. But now, standing in her office watching the sunrise over a city she'd conquered, she thought maybe she was ready to build something beyond the company, ready to let someone see her not as the powerful CEO or the symbol of strength, but as Shiana, just Shiana. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Michael. Coffee sounds good. How about this week? His response came quickly, enthusiastic and warm, and Shiana felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, not for revenge or justice or proving anyone wrong. Just hope for tomorrow. For whatever came next. For a life that was hers to build however she wanted. She'd walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged into something unbreakable. She'd taken betrayal and turned it into power. She'd proven that the only person who could define her was herself. Joey Godfrey had tried to make her small. Instead, he'd freed her to discover just how magnificent she actually was. And now she stood tall, wealthy, free, powerful, exactly as she was always meant to be. Shana Jones stood tall, wealthy, free and powerful, proving betrayal only fueled her rise. And the crown she wore was one she'd forged herself from fire and determination. The end.